Oh yeah, we shine like stars. Oh yeah, we shine like stars.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniele Griego, and I'm the State Coordinator for National History Day in Missouri. Thanks so much for joining us today for the NHD theme webinar. Today's program, along with all our virtual events, is made possible thanks to the generous support of the State Historical Society of Missouri's members and donors. Today, we'll be talking about resources and approaches to this year's NHD theme, which is Turning Points in History. I'm joined by Kansas City Regional Coordinator Mark Adams from the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum. Also with us is NHD educator Dr. Heather Van Otterloo from South Middle School in Joplin, in the Joplin NHD region. We welcome your questions at the end of the presentation. We are using Zoom webinar, so we do not see or hear anyone on camera, but we can see your questions come through and look forward to responding to as many as we can today. Additionally, this program is being recorded and will be available on demand at the shsmo.org website at a later date. Thanks for joining us. And so before we get into our main presentations today, I just wanted to make some announcements and bring up some resources that you can look at as you're navigating the theme for this year. First off, I wanted to announce that the state contest now has an official date. It's April 27th. So that is a Saturday, and save the date for that. I also wanted to share my screen really quick and just bring up some resources that can be helpful in research. All right, so the first page that I have up here is the State Historical Society of Missouri webpage. And we have a number of resources that might be helpful in your research journey this year through NHD. The first tab I want to highlight is this research tab. It has tabs for all of our collections, links to our art, manuscripts, maps, newspapers, oral history, and photographs. So please do take a look at those. I'm just clicking on the photograph collection as an example. You can view the collection here and search your topic accordingly. So we have an advanced search at the top, and you can also browse photos here at the bottom. Also, something to look at, let me go back to that homepage again. We have a Learn and Engage tab, and here you can find the K through 12 tab that also has helpful resources like our Historic Missourians page. The Historic Missourians page has bios about notable Missourians throughout history. So that's something great to have as you start your research. It also has the link to our National History Day in Missouri webpage, where you can find updates about the contest and also some resources. And we also have this great tab about using SHSMO in the classroom. So here's a video by our archivist Katie Seal and Rala talking about digital and material collections. And now I want to go to the NHD in Missouri page. So I want to draw attention specifically to the student tab. Under the student tab, if you scroll down a little further, you can see examples of past projects. Take a look at those as you're creating your project. We also have links to the theme book, the rule book, and evaluation sheets as well. So that's important as you construct your project, see how you're going to be evaluated by the judges. And then at the very bottom, we've started a resources section. And these are just helpful guides that can give you topic ideas, take you through the steps of creating a History Day project. We have a section on what to ask experts if you're talking to people in the field. And this page will grow, so keep a lookout for that. Let me stop our share, and now I want to hand it over to Regional Coordinator of KC, Mark Adams, for his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle, and I appreciate everybody tuning in to watch the webinar today. And of course, it's recorded as well. So if you're watching this later, What I'd like to do is share some of the different graphic organizers that are available out there, particularly for students doing this the first year or looking for a different approach if you've done it in previous years. And I found it really helps the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in particular to help get started if you've not done it before or you're taking a fresh approach. So let me share my screen, and some of the visual organization you'll see may be familiar, but I think there's going to be some that you've not seen before. So let me get that up. And the first one is fairly obvious because it's from the National History Day website, which you certainly should look at, nhd.org. They come up with a different visual organizer for each theme. Every year they come up with a different graphic organizer, and they tend to like to do an acronym or a way of helping you remember to break down the theme. So as you know, this year's theme is turning points, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that with some of the other graphic organizers. But the way the National Office broke this up was through using the word tides, so T for turning point. And then as you see here, and you can print these off from the National History Day website as a PDF, so you can even fill them in. The I, they have important historical context, so what was happening when the turning point occurred. It's always really important with History Day to think about what else is happening at the same time, because maybe that's influencing events. And then the third one for the D in the word tides, they have details. So who was involved? When did it happen? When did it occur? So all of those important information surrounding your particular turning point. And then E is for events, and they have events, ideas, and actions. So what events took place? What ideas were involved? What actions took place around your turning point? And then the last one they have, and you'll see this on a number of the graphic organizers I'm going to share with you today, is this idea of significance in history. What is the significance of the topic in the short term, in the long term, locally, regionally, globally? What's the significance? We'll see a little bit later on, they use the question, so what? So why have you done all this research? What's so important about it? So this is the one from the National Office. You may have already seen this one before, but it's a good kickoff for our webinar today. I'm going to advance to some others that you may not have seen before. This one, and I grabbed these from a number of different state History Day sites. I believe this one is from Minnesota, and they do a really good job with their National History Day resources. So I would encourage you to dig into the Minnesota History Day website. If you just do a Google search for Minnesota History Day, it will pop up pretty quickly. They've broken it down into before, during, and after. This is really helpful once you've actually chosen a topic, and as you start to break it down and think about, how am I going to organize this in an exhibit board or in a performance or in a website? And one good way to do that is to think of it kind of chronologically, but break it down into before, during, and after. So what is happening before the turning point? What's the context? What led up to it? I always like to say when I do my classroom presentations, somebody just didn't wake up one day and come up with an idea to change something. Something's led up to that. There's a reason for it. So the before is really important. And honestly, when I've been judging at some History Day competitions, students often forget that background, the before information. It's really crucial. So you're setting it in context, but you're also giving reasons why, in this case, the turning point took place. The second part of that is during. So similar to the first one, this one expands it a bit more. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, all of those main events of your topic should be included there in the during section. And then afterwards, what changed because of it? We mentioned already the short and the long term. In this graphic organizer, it talks about the intended and unintended consequences. Sometimes with the turning point, it's going to have a positive effect, but it might have a negative effect. And it's really important to look at those things. How does it affect different people in different ways? And what are their viewpoints on that? So you can get into the multiple perspectives the History Day requires. In that after section, how does it affect different people in different ways, even if it's sometimes unintended? The second part of that kind of goes a little more into detail of the actual turning point. So whatever your turning point is, was technology a particular factor? What was life like? Who were the groups of people involved? So here you're identifying those key people, those key actors in your particular topic. Who's involved? Who's leading the change? Who's wanting this turning point to happen? Where is it happening? Those kinds of things. And then to really dig in to what the turning point actually was. I will say, we may come back to this in the Q&A a little bit, a turning point is not necessarily the first to cross the line. It's something that actually changes something. So that's an important thing to remember. And then the last part in that is, how does your topic change history? What was the most significant part of it? Sometimes you might have multiple things that changed, and you should include all of those. But in your conclusion, it's really important to kind of point to the most significant change as a result of your turning point. So you've got to keep that theme in mind. But I find this before, during, and after a really great organizational tool when you're beginning to build your project. Another one, a bit more straightforward from the national office, but this is a good way to identify if you're stuck on your topic, or you're trying to identify, you're choosing between one or two topics. I was in some schools a couple of weeks ago, had a couple of students that were, they had one topic in mind, but they also had another topic in mind. Really, the best way to decide that is, first of all, making sure it addresses the theme. And secondly, that there are primary sources about your topic. So this kind of organizer really helps with that. So topic one, topic two, you could extend that out if you've got more ideas. So what happened? Summarize it. How does it connect to the theme? And they use Earth Day as an example. So that might be a good model for you to look at. How does it connect to the theme? Specifically, what is the turning point, and what does that turning point lead to? And then the last part, as I mentioned before, so what? What's the impact? What's the significance of the topic? So this is a good way, if you're trying to choose between topics, to kind of fill out this chart to really help you decide which direction you want to go. If I was to add a fourth box to this one, I would say, what primary sources are available, quickly, as a quick search, just to see what's out there, because sometimes students run into a dead end on resources. And I'm going to mention resources in a minute. If you've already decided on your topic, this is a good way to measure that you're on the right track. Really asking yourself the question, how does your topic connect to the theme? And you really can't ask yourself that question enough times, because guess what? The judges are going to ask you that question at the regional level, at the state level, at the national level. All the judges are going to say to you, how does your topic connect to the theme? So you really need to make sure you can answer that very quickly, not umming and ahhing and hesitating, but really concretely answer that and be ready for that question in the interviews, in the competition. And then the last graphic organizer, and then I'll talk very briefly about some resources that often get overlooked. And this is more of a way to narrow your topic, but it could be, again, if you're trying to decide on a topic and you've got, again, a couple in mind, or if you don't have any in mind, this steps for success from the History Day office in California is pretty helpful. First of all, they remind you it's not really a rule, but they guide you in that your topic really should be more than 20 years old. That's, again, a guideline, but it's a pretty rigid guideline in some ways. So think about the time span you're interested in. I always say, students, when you're choosing a topic, to choose a topic you are passionate about. You're going to be spending 6 to 9 months doing your research. You don't want to do something that you're not interested in. So choosing a time period that you're particularly interested in. Identify your own interest. Are you interested in technology or medicine or the environment or politics? Whatever that is, find your own interest. Maybe there's a location in mind that you can identify, maybe a particular geographic area that you're interested in. Once you've started to do that, the fifth step is to look at how people are affected. So does it affect people politically, economically, culturally? Does it affect their language? Does it affect where they live? If you think about Native Americans being moved during Manifest Destiny, is there legal battles, legal struggles, like in civil rights? Are people's voting rights affected? Things like that. How are people affected? It's very important you identify the people within your turning point. Then there might be a particular event or action. We always say in History Day, you want to narrow down. You don't want to look at all of World War II or something, or all of the Civil War. You want to narrow it down to a particular event. What I like to say is choose a case study to kind of build your project around. And then you can look at, well, what is the impact of that? Is it important enough to become a History Day topic? Does it have impact? If it doesn't have impact, you don't have a great topic. So sometimes finding that impact at the beginning can really help you measure whether you have a topic that's worth focusing on. And then finally, and we were talking before the webinar started about students creating thesis statements. Eventually, they're going to have to create, a focus question that eventually you can turn into a thesis statement to kind of set the student up to find all of the things they need to do to answer their question. So that's a great one from California that maybe some of you haven't seen before. It's relatively new to me, and I've been doing this a long time. So I think that's a really good one to remind yourselves with. And again, their website, National History Day in California, has a whole teacher toolkit and student resources, but there's nothing wrong with going to other states for ideas for a successful History Day topic. And then I just wanted to finish off my section with just some reminders, I guess, of some research resources that I think are often overlooked. And that is those in your own backyard, your own local resources. Even if you're doing a topic that's, out of state, you're doing something on the East Coast or the West Coast or in another state, very often your local resources are valid for those broader topics. I'll give one example. We had a student a number of years ago looking at World War II. And one of the things that they found in our area, in the Kansas City metropolitan area where I am, was on the Kansas side, in Kansas City, Kansas, there was a munitions factory that employed women during World War II. And their focus was Rosie the Riveter and World War II. And they ended up interviewing 7 or 8 female workers in an army plant during World War II. And then through that research, through these ladies, they found 2 or 3 men that were also working in those factories in Kansas City, Kansas. So they got all these great perspectives from people in their local community that they were able to interview. So don't forget your local resources, whether it's your local public libraries. And I don't just mean the books they have on the shelves. I've got a screenshot here from our local library across the street here from Truman Library, which is the Mid-Continent Public Library, which has more than 30 branches. I know not all of you are in this area, but they have tons of materials online that anybody in Missouri can connect to. They have more than 200 online research databases. And similarly with Kansas City Public Library, St. Louis, Columbia, Joplin, Springfield, all Cape Girardeau, all over Missouri, the public library system should be looked at, not just for the books on the shelves and so on, but all of the databases that they subscribe to, that you need a library card to access to those materials, and you can't find those with Google searches. And then there's the places themselves, local historic sites, local historical societies, local archives within your own communities, or maybe you can travel a short way to find all of those. Danielle mentioned the State Historical Society, and of course, they've got research centers all over the state as well, 7, I believe. And then you also have your own local sites. I know in the Kansas City metropolitan area, we have more than 250 local historic sites and museums. And I'm sure it's the same in St. Louis and to a lesser degree, probably in some of the other communities. But all of those are out there for you to explore and find what they have. And then the final plug is for various local universities that many of them have special collections focused on particular areas. So, for example, at UMKC here in Kansas City, they have a special collection on LGBTQ, and we've got other universities. They've got a special collection here at UMKC on, they have a sound archives, so you can get various sound clips, various music, all kinds of things, old radio broadcasts. So every local university has its own specialty, so you can find out what they have and see if they've got anything related to your topic ideas. So with that, I will stop my screen sharing and pass it back.
Thank you, Mark. Those are great resources. Now I would like to hand it over to Heather Van Otterloo to talk about approaching the theme.
Hi, everyone. I am going to share my screen. I'm going to mostly just be talking about how to make NHD manageable within your classroom. I teach middle school, and I feel like I'm laying a foundation for high schoolers, but then a lot of times there's a lot of high schoolers who haven't had to do research in this level. So being able to break down the process kind of helps them take it step at a time and actually devote the time they need to it. So my phases, there's 5 phases that my students go through whenever they're working on History Day. The first is laying the foundation. Then we do main research and writing. We move into creating the project and then getting ready for judging. I try and not necessarily put them all in a box of like, we're only focused on this right now. But especially for my like 11-year-olds, it's really helpful to kind of say, well, that's for the next phase. Take a note or something like that to kind of help them stay focused. So in phase 1, laying the foundation, I focus on what is NHD, understanding the theme, and picking a topic. So NHD obviously has great resources on their website, on their YouTube channel. I leave it to NHD to explain what NHD is. And then I also have some student experiences from the past that I share with them to just kind of talk about and hype up this thing that can seem really daunting. Understanding the theme, I spent a lot of time in just like, what exactly is this? Museum this year had a great lesson on kind of a turning point, and just the opening activity was having students think about an event in their life, a huge event in their life, maybe a new baby being born or moving to somewhere new, and talking about how their life was different before and after, what it was like before the event and then after. And I felt like that kind of gave my kids an idea of an actual turning point being something that changed the course of history. We spent a lot of time working through the definition of a turning point, kind of really looking at all the pieces that go together to really understand that. And then this piece came from some materials from the Minnesota National History Day, but just kind of that visual organizer. I actually teach English. So one of the things that we talked about is in a story, conflict starts our rising action and changes the path. And so we kind of looked at this similarly, that like life was going one way for a population or whoever, and then this thing happened and it changed it. And like Mark said, it could have changed it for the positive, it could have changed it for the negative, it could have done both depending on the population. So we spent a lot of time talking about that when you're picking a topic and understanding this theme, that you really have to think about, did it change the course of history as it was going along? So then kind of topic selection comes next. They come to me in August and they're like, I know my topic. And I'm like, you know, a topic, I try and get them to really not just commit right away to one thing that they've heard of or something like that, and to look at it from a lot of angles. So we spend a lot of time talking on there's no perfect winner topic. A lot of my kids that have been to regionals or state or nationals and they hear the winners, they're like, well, anybody who does this topic wins. And I said, no, anybody who wins did the topic well. And so, but we talk about that there's no winner topic. You can't pick Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire and say, I'm going to win because judges love this. That's just not the way it goes. So we talk about that the characteristics of a good topic are narrow. Mark talked about this too. It really can't be World War II. That's not the scope of something that can be covered in History Day, especially when you think about that a display board is limited to 500 student composed words and the other limitations. So it has to be narrow. If you like World War II, let's look there and let's really think about what we can find in that area. It has significance, meaning that it had an impact somehow that's provable, that's historically related. We spend a lot of time not talking about that. We can't make philosophical conclusions, like we can't say we should have entered World War II early or something like that. We have to really think about historical significance. It took place in history. This is what Mark was talking about with the unofficial 20-year rule. Some of my kids were really excited this year that 9/11 was over 20 years ago. And they're like, yeah, that was a huge turning point. And I was like, okay, but you really are gonna have to work hard to make sure that you're getting all the information that's there and not too focused on that something is recent and we're gonna have lots of sources. That brings me to that there's a lot of available research. It needs to be there. Most important is there's a theme connection. A lot of times kids have a real passion for a topic, but they can't really tell you how it was a turning point or a breaking of a barrier or something like that. So that's why it's so important for them to really understand the theme. Like they can be passionate about it, but if they can't find that angle, then it's not going to be successful. And then, like Mark said, they're interested. I had kids that started in August last year and went all the way to June as they went to nationals. So we talked about that they spent like 10 months of their lives really like dedicated to this topic. And I say, if you leave loving it, I'm excited, but I'd also understand if you leave never wanting to talk about that topic again. So this is my topic funnel, not my topic funnel, the topic funnel that I use to kind of help guide students in thinking about narrowing their topic. They're going from the theme into an area of interest, into a topic, and then a more specific example that goes here. So I think on this one, it was talking about a particular suffragette and her approach to it, and kind of talking about that she used a different approach than maybe the more well-known suffragette. So that's where if they're like really interested in women's voting rights and they know Susan B. Anthony and they know just the main players that are in a lot of history, that I ask them to think about, okay, go read about them and see if you can connect off of them. We do a lot of talking about that. Mark showed us this, and I did use that this year with my kids. Whenever they were like, I don't really know what topic I want to do, or they were like, I think I want to do this one, I made sure that they went through and could actually start doing some thinking about the topic and really start connecting it to the theme. And I agree with Mark when he said, I think an addition to this would be, are the resources there, particularly primary resources. I have a student, and I'm a big on like, put your toe in the water, try it. They don't all go through all 5 phases. And so one of my students picked a topic, and I kind of knew, I was like, I don't know that this one's going to work, but he was really passionate about it. He can connect it to the theme, but he's just not finding a lot of quality resources on it. And so he's like, I know I'm going to stop at this research phase, but I've learned a lot about the process. But I think if we had what kind of resources are available whenever I did this, that probably would have helped solve that problem a little bit for him. Phase 2 is where I spend a lot of my time. So we start in September, October with kind of understanding the theme and laying the foundation and then starting the research. But we know that the research is the big part of it. Like, yes, there's a lot of flash to making the project, but you have to have the content before you can make the project. So some of the things that we talk about in this phase is keeping track of sources, primary and secondary sources, pre-research, and thesis statements. Like, these things are woven all the way throughout, but like when I do like a focus lesson during this, it's usually on these kinds of things. So I don't know where people are having their students kind of keep track of their sources, but Noodle Tools is a great tool for that. It allows teacher feedback. Like, I have access to all of my students. Sorry. I have access to all of my students' projects in an inbox, and I'm able to give them feedback. I can click on something and say, your annotation, you forgot to annotate, or you've missed an author here, or whatever. It also has note-taking built into it. Not all my kids like the note-taking. It's on note cards, and they're not used to that necessarily. But I do think that for some of my kids that are really like spatially organized, but not super good at like keeping track of tangible things, it's great for that. It helps produce the annotated bibliography. They can work on one project together, and it has differentiated levels for MLA, APA, Chicago, Turabian. So this year I've been using the junior level because otherwise they're like, I think this is a journal, but they don't know but I have to really work on them, the difference between someone's written journal of their accounts versus an academic journal. It does have a bit of a cost, but I'm pretty sure that it's still in the first season that someone's doing NHD, they can get a Noodle Tools account for free, meaning the teacher. But otherwise, I think it's like $60 a year. Primary and secondary sources, NHD's got us covered. These videos are great in helping the kids understand that and their purpose. Just know that near the end, it shows people on the website where to do some things, and their website has changed pretty dramatically. So, but primary and secondary sources, helping kids understand that, especially sixth graders. I use a lot of times the firsthand account, like a visual representation of primary as our firsthand account, and then it's passed on as it keeps going. And that kind of helps them a lot. Then when we get kind of topic approval, we've moved through kind of ensuring that we are interested in the subject, that kind of stuff. I have my kids do what I call pre-research. It's still yet another almost barrier to them ensuring that they're ready for this topic, getting the basics, the who, what, where, when. Like, just tell me what happened. And that's all based on the heart of the story. And then they go on to their deeper research, which is focused on the historical context. Why did it happen? What happened long before that prepared or that kind of set the stage for it? What happened right before that was a catalyst to the action? And then the significance. What's the impact? What was the right away impact? And what's the long-term impact? What are we still feeling today? Those are the things that they're looking for with their research. Once they've had a pretty good amount of time, like a month or more of daily time dedicated to research, that's when we start looking at our thesis statement. I want them to have a solid foundation of details, because otherwise they can't really elocute how something was a turning point. So they have to know the basics, and then they have to bring it together. So as you can see, this organizer is from National History Day in Minnesota too. They actually on their teacher website have a video that walks kids through writing a thesis statement. They use an example with Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott that really helped my sixth graders, because I got some excellent thesis statements from them this year. And that was the first time I had used that video, and it helped them see where they needed to put those things and how to put them together. So as an English teacher, I kind of have a little bit of an advantage in the fact that I can ask my kids, and it still be part of my core curriculum, to turn their research into an informational, formal research paper. And I find that extremely helpful. Like, I would sometimes say the research, we could just start the project, but once I started really doing the informational paper, that like basically something that could be turned into the paper category, that really kind of enhanced my kids' ability to then translate that to a script or to the beginnings of their, not beginnings, but something to whittle down for their exhibits, that kind of thing. So if you have the ability to have students write, or if, as a student, if you have the ability to write and put all that stuff together in a really organized way, like you would turn it into NHD as a paper, then you're going to have a really good basis for a project when the time comes. So in phase 3, they start creating the project. So the first thing is choosing the project type. Some of my kids really want to do exhibits, but their technical abilities, their motor skills, like limit them from being able to do that. So we have to have some decent conversations about what are you capable of versus what you want to do. And so if you are not a fine details person, it's probably not one of the best things to choose. So their interest, their ability level is huge. Whether they have access to video editing software is huge. And then, is it just suitable to the topic? Is the topic suitable to the project type? There are a lot of projects out there that are really great, but maybe would best be served with a paper because there's not a lot of video or imagery to go with it. And then also thinking about they're going to be group or individual. So that's a big conversation. Like a lot of my kids, they are like, I want to do the flashy stuff. I want to do a website. I want to do the documentary. And I typically let them do whatever they want to do. But we do have these conversations about, well, are there images? Do you feel confident? What experience do you have? Getting acquainted with the NHD rules is an absolute must for students because otherwise they're just going at it. They're just like running. And so the rule book's available on there. There are lots of websites that have kind of condensed it into just like the key rules that they need to know right away before delving into that. But it's super important to ensure that they're creating according to the contest guidelines. Organizing, Mark talked about this before, the before, during, and after. We talk a little bit about the long before, the build up. We call it the heart of the story. We spend a lot of time in the heart of the story, but I say that's not good enough. You know, your body, your heart is contained in your body. So let's build it up. I'm so sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. Backwards. Then phase 4 is getting ready for judging. We know that they have to have an annotated bibliography. If you're not using Noodle tools or another website or resource, that's the word I was looking for, that can help them produce that, then they really need to work their way through it. The biggest thing that I always tell my kids is that annotated bibliography should be ongoing throughout the process, because you don't want to go back and try and remember what you got from a source. You really need to be taking notes on what you use, being very organized, being very intentional with adding your sources places. NHD's YouTube channel has what's an annotated bibliography and what are annotations. They do a good job kind of explaining those things to help students best achieve that. Process paper, another thing that NHD, because they require it, has a great video on. This one, my students are always pretty confused by because they've never really had to like reflect on their process that much. They just did it. And so for them to think through this, I think is also a great preparation for judging, because they have to think through why I chose it, how it connects, that kind of thing. Which brings me to practicing judges' questions, working with other students to practice those potential questions. I just kind of brainstormed some areas that those might be in, and I came up with introducing what inspired you to get this topic, the context, how you researched, which of your sources were most valuable, how did you find your sources, connection to the theme. That one's one that I make my students. It's almost like an elevator pitch. If you were in the elevator with someone for 30 seconds, how would you tell them this about this project? What did they find challenging, that personal reflection, and how did they choose the project? So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. That's my email address. So good luck. I'm sorry that crazy music came on.
That was a great presentation. Thank you. Great advice. Now, I wanted to open it up to our audience for any questions. We have some questions coming in. One question is, Heather, how do you get some students excited about the theme and the topic that maybe aren't super excited at first at the beginning of the school year?
So the biggest thing I do, I think, is kind of use those previous experiences. Even just my kids going to regionals and having a day where they're exploring a campus and then talking to adults about something that they created is really a good buy-in for my kids. At least I've noticed they are like, I get to talk to like a museum curator, I get to talk to a park ranger, and that kind of thing. And I get to eat in the school cafeteria. So I spend a lot of time on just kind of the benefits of this. And then we talk academically, the benefits of it, like how this is going to, these skills are something that we're going to be using. So, I mean, I have some pretty highly motivated learners as it is, but even whenever I've done this with unmotivated or lesser motivated learners, it seemed like having an authentic audience was the biggest thing that really hooked them.
Mark, you talked about using local resources, both for local topics, but also topics out of state as well. Do you find that researching a local topic is a good way to go about a History Day project? Is that something you would encourage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things you often get with a local topic, it's often unique. And so, you Heather used the Rosa Parks example. We will see, no, there's nothing wrong with studying Rosa Parks, but when you see 7 or 8 of those in the exhibit hall, it is nice to see a different topic. And the primary sources are actually just really almost unlimited for some of the local topics. And so certainly getting access to those primary sources, there's more of them, they're easier to get. And then, of course, like I said, having a unique topic, or like I said before, maybe it's a kind of a subset of a larger topic, but you're able to use local examples. And that really kind of enhances the primary sources. They may have the traditional primary sources that maybe other students are using for a similar topic, but then they've gone that extra mile and found some local connection to that national topic that people were maybe not aware of or something like that. So that can really show that students have gone that little bit further and they've got resources that other students don't have.
Sure, and I found that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Good one.
I was just going to say I wanted to say on my slide with all those local resources, I actually did not mention the Truman Library, and I probably should.
Yeah, and I found that studying a local topic, actually, having those resources at your disposal, finding something that hasn't been studied a lot makes the student feel like an expert in their field too. They're able to talk about this topic that's maybe kind of underrepresented. All right, and Heather, someone asked, how much do you go over the evaluation sheets with your students? Do you kind of take them through so that they're well equipped to know what the judges are expecting?
That's something that I forgot to include in that preparing for judging. When we look at the rule book, when we kind of look at the rules, we also look at the evaluation sheets. We talk about like what they mean. I pull out previous evaluation sheets and kind of show kids projects and talk about, this is what the judges said. We want to know what they mean when they say this kind of thing. And so, yeah, I spend a fair amount of time on the kids that are for sure going to go to competition. Like I said, not all my kids make it through all the phases, but they all get to that research paper point. And when we talk about the special kind of pieces of each evaluation in regards to the category type and how to make sure that our project meets those. But yeah, like helping them understand, like your project needs to show that context and that significance throughout. And that's what and then talking about wide variety of sources, not just meaning like I have primary and secondary, but also meaning I have books, I have documents, I have all these things, and that you've looked at multiple perspectives. So we spend a lot of time in there because I think a lot of times you look at it and it's just black and white and you don't know for sure the depth of it. So we have to spend a lot of time on like, yeah, I got a lot of sources. I don't know why they're mad. But no, it's, it's like, well, how did you use them? And did you find both sides of the story?
True. And this question, I live on the Kansas side of the border. Am I allowed to participate in Missouri History Day? So you have to be going to school in Missouri to participate in Missouri History Day. So I would look for the Kansas coordinator to see how you can get involved with that.
We do have a number of students that live in Kansas that participate in Missouri because they go to school in Missouri. Many of the private schools in Kansas City are right on State Line Road. So it gets a little confusing. So it's not where you live, it's where the school is.
So if
Be
you
careful
do, so if you do go to school in Missouri, feel free to contact me and I can get you in touch with information.
Pembroke Hill, Barstow, all of those are right on state line. So it depends where the school is. Those schools are all have Missouri addresses, as does St. Teresa's. So it's not where the student lives, it's where the school address is. I probably face that more than any other coordinator.
Another question, either you can answer. What's one of the biggest mistakes you see when trying to approach the theme? Maybe as a judge, as a teacher, what have you seen that maybe doesn't get, high ranks when it goes to contest?
Related to the theme specifically? I'll say the one I kind of touched on earlier to begin with, and I might come up with something else. Only because this came across in a school I was in I think September. The idea that doing something first was seen as a turning point, and that's not true. Just being first is not necessarily a turning point, right? So just to be very careful about that definition. Me being first to work today didn't change anything, right? Or being first in a race, something like that. Now, if somebody is, the first female NASCAR driver, well, then we can look at that a little bit and see how that's a turning point. But being first in a race doesn't necessarily mean anything. But then if it's Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics, well, then maybe it does mean something. So you've got to be very careful about, Neil Armstrong being first on the moon. We're going to see a lot of that in Columbia in April, right? And that's a turning point. So sometimes the first is a turning point and sometimes the first isn't. So you have to be very careful about that. Just being first across the line doesn't mean it's a turning point. Just be very careful about that.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to when I was really working on helping them understand the theme, really talking about a fundamental change, a fundamental alteration in the course of history.
And it's kind of interesting. One way to approach your topic is to look at that first. What did it change? And then you back up and say, oh, it changed something. We at least check that box. And now we can go look at some of the other things. If it doesn't change anything, then move on to the next topic.
And I think a lot of kids are so used to like chronologically researching something, for them to go to the end result can be challenging. And so like encouraging them to say, but the end result is really the point, and so that can be, they're so used to first, then next.
It's okay to start. It's okay to start with the spoiler alert, right?
Yes.
All right. And someone else asked, does the theme have to be mentioned in that thesis statement?
It doesn't have to be, but I'll tell you what, I would highly encourage it. It's not a rule, but I would highly encourage it. Just going to say I would include it in the conclusion as well.
Yeah. Sometimes they want to use a little bit of a synonym, like pivotal this year was kind of brought up a lot in my room. And, I suggested they switch back to turning point, just not overusing it is a lot of what we talk about. A turning point in history was when they turned, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
kids
Yeah.
want to over exaggerate it, but yes,
Yeah.
I
The
strongly
grammar
suggest
still
it.
has to be good. Turning
Yes,
point three times
yes.
in the sentence, but use those synonyms throughout the project. I think is fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. That looks like it's all for questions. Any final thoughts from anybody
Well,
before
you
we?
asked about the mistakes, and the only thing, and this is hard to explain, but don't assume that your judges know your topic. It's really important to explain your topic, even if and explain how it connects to the theme. Don't keep that explanation in your head. Explain specifically to the judges how it connects. A number of years ago, we had the theme communication, and we had a lot of students that did the Pony Express, and they just assumed that because Pony Express was a form of communication, they didn't really need to explain it. You still have to explain it because the judges want to hear you articulate that. Of course, it needs to be in the exhibit or the documentary and so on. It needs to be specifically stated in there and in the process paper. So don't just assume the knowledge. And even in terms of the topic, whatever the background information is, don't assume that. The example I always give years and years ago at national finals, we had some students from Kansas that did a project on Mennonites in Kansas. And the judge in the final round in nationals, they were in the top 10 as it was back then. And that particular judge was from Hawaii. It was the Hawaii state coordinator. And he'd never heard of or come across Mennonites ever before. And he didn't know what they were. And he was just really appreciative that these students took the time to actually explain what Mennonites were within the context of, in this particular case, it was a performance. But I felt like I was in the room doing paperwork for nationals, overhearing this conversation of judges. And I realized that if those students had not explained that context of that particular cultural and religious traditions that they had, they may not have been as successful as they were. So it's just a really valid point about context, because yes, in Missouri, we know we've got Missouri judges, but you're not always going to have Missouri judges.
And that's a little bit where I tell them to develop that elevator speech, almost something that they could introduce it to. And that's kind of an understandable thing to kids, to how do I kind of convey this, having that identifies those important parts.
Great. Any other final thoughts before we finish up today?
Just, it's totally worth it. The kids learned so much, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you for setting this up, Danielle. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mark and Heather. Great advice from both of you. And remember to check out the nhd.org website for resources, as well as the Missouri page with updates on contest dates and resources as well. And thank you for joining us. Have a great contest season.